In the dusty archives of Santiago, a young woman sits surrounded by yellowed newspapers and faded photographs, her hands trembling as she pieces together fragments of a story that will reshape Latin American literature forever. The past is never dead. It's not even past. Isabel Allende whispers these words to herself as she begins to write, not knowing she's about to birth a masterpiece that will haunt readers for generations. The typewriter keys click like distant gunfire in the silence of exile. Allende, banished from her homeland of Chile, carries within her chest the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Each character she creates breathes with the desperation of the disappeared, the fury of the oppressed, the tender resilience of women who refuse to be silenced. Her fingers dance across the keys, conjuring spirits from memory. The year is 1981, and the world trembles on the edge of transformation. In Chile, Pinochet's iron grip tightens around the throat of democracy. In exile, Allende transforms personal trauma into universal truth. She writes not just a novel, but a testimony, a resurrection of voices that tyrants sought to bury beneath the weight of official silence. The page becomes a battleground between memory and forgetting. Clara, the clairvoyant matriarch, emerges from Allende's imagination like smoke from burning sage. Her green hair floats in supernatural currents, her prophetic dreams bleeding into reality. She represents the mystical thread that weaves through Latin American consciousness, the belief that the boundary between the living and the dead is as thin as morning mist over the Andes. Her silence speaks louder than armies. The Del Valle family tree spreads its branches across generations like a map of Latin America itself. Each ring in its trunk marks another cycle of violence, another revolution, another broken promise. Allende understands that personal history mirrors political history, that the wounds of nations fester in the hearts of individuals long after the last shots are fired. Every scar tells a story of survival. Magic realism flows through Allende's prose like blood through veins. She learned this technique from the masters, Garcia Marquez, who showed her that truth sometimes requires the impossible, that reality in Latin America is so surreal that only magic can capture its essence. Flying carpets and levitating saints become metaphors for the inexplicable nature of political oppression. Wonder becomes a weapon against despair. The novel's first line crackles with prophetic energy. Barabbas came to us by sea. Like a biblical plague, violence washes ashore in the form of a massive dog, foreshadowing the chaos that will consume the Del Valle family. Allende understands that destruction often arrives disguised as innocence, that the seeds of tragedy are planted in moments of apparent joy. Every beginning contains its own ending. Esteban Trueba rises from the text like a monument to masculine pride and its inevitable corruption. His iron will shapes the landscape around him, bending others to his vision through force and fury. Yet Allende refuses to paint him as a simple villain. She reveals the wounded boy beneath the tyrant's mask, the fear that drives men to destroy what they cannot control. Power becomes its own prison. The big house stands like a fortress against time itself, its walls expanding and contracting with the family's fortunes. Allende transforms architecture into character, making every room a repository of memory. The house breathes with the ghosts of its inhabitants, groaning under the weight of secrets that seep into its very foundations like groundwater. Buildings remember what humans choose to forget. Women in Allende's universe possess a different kind of power, the ability to endure, to preserve, to transform suffering into strength. They gather in kitchens and gardens, weaving networks of resistance through recipes and remedies. Their wisdom passes from mother to daughter like heirloom seeds, growing stronger with each generation despite attempts to uproot them. Resilience blooms in the darkest soil. The novel's political awakening mirrors Chile's own tumultuous journey toward consciousness. As young characters discover the brutal realities of class warfare, readers witness the moment when innocence dies and awareness is born. Allende captures the precise instant when personal comfort becomes morally unbearable, when silence transforms into complicity. Revolution begins with a single opened eye. Death in this narrative refuses to stay buried. Spirits linger in mirrors, whisper through dreams, and leave roses on windowsills. Allende draws from indigenous traditions that understand death not as ending, but as transformation, not as absence, but as presence in different form. The dead become more powerful than the living, their voices echoing through generations. Memory is the final frontier of resistance. The Chilean countryside pulses with ancient rhythms beneath the surface of modernity. Allende's prose captures the scent of eucalyptus, the weight of mountain air, the particular quality of light that filters through Andean peaks. She writes landscape not as backdrop but as character, recognizing that land holds the memory of all who have walked upon it. Geography becomes autobiography. Allende's own biography bleeds into every page, her privileged childhood, her journalist's eye for detail, her intimate knowledge of political upheaval. She writes from the wound of exile, transforming personal loss into universal truth. Her characters carry fragments of her own broken heart, her own rage against injustice, her own desperate hope for redemption. Fiction becomes the deepest form of testimony. The novel's structure mirrors the cyclical nature of Latin American history. Coups and revolutions, dictators and democrats, hope and despair spinning like a wheel that never stops turning. Allende understands that time in Latin America is not linear, but spiral, that the past continuously resurfaces in new forms, demanding recognition and justice. History is a ghost that refuses exorcism. Love in this universe is both salvation and destruction, a force that heals and wounds in equal measure. Allende explores how love survives torture, transcends death, and transforms enemies into allies. Yet she also reveals love's capacity for obsession, its ability to justify violence, its power to blind us to truth. The heart knows no borders, acknowledges no laws. The novel's publication in 1982 coincides with Latin America's literary explosion onto the world stage. Allende joins the ranks of writers who refuse to separate politics from art, who understand that in regions where truth is the first casualty of war, fiction becomes a form of journalism. Her voice adds to the chorus demanding justice for the disappeared. Literature becomes a court of last resort. Clara's notebooks represent the power of women's voices to preserve truth when official history lies. She records not grand events but small moments, the taste of fear, the sound of boots on cobblestones, the feeling of hope dying in the chest like a bird with broken wings. Her domestic chronicle becomes more valuable than any government document. Truth lives in the margins of official stories. The novel's multi-generational scope allows Allende to explore how trauma travels through bloodlines like a genetic inheritance. Children carry their parents' wounds in their DNA, their dreams haunted by violence they never directly experienced. She shows how healing requires not forgetting but remembering, not silence but story. The past lives in our bodies whether we acknowledge it or not. Allende's prose style marries the intimate with the epic, the personal with the political. She writes with the rhythm of prayer, the urgency of testimony, the precision of journalism. Her sentences flow like river water, sometimes gentle, sometimes turbulent, always carrying the sediment of history toward an uncertain future. Every word is chosen for its weight, its resonance, its capacity to heal. The novel's international success, translated into dozens of languages adapted for stage and screen, proves that some stories transcend their origins to become universal human documents. Allende's tale of one Chilean family becomes every family's story, every nation's struggle with its own dark chapters. Literature builds bridges across the chasms that politics create. The supernatural elements in the novel serve not as escapism but as metaphor for the incomprehensible nature of political violence. When reality becomes surreal, when the impossible becomes daily news, only magic can capture the true texture of experience. Flying women and prophetic dreams make more sense than economic theories or military strategies. Magic becomes realism when reality becomes impossible. Allende's treatment of class warfare reveals the intimate connections between economic inequality and personal suffering. She shows how poverty wounds not just the body but the spirit, how wealth corrupts not just systems but souls. Her characters move across class lines like travellers crossing treacherous terrain, each step fraught with danger. Money becomes a kind of blood type, determining who lives and dies. The novel's feminist consciousness emerges not through speeches, but through the quiet rebellions of daily life. Women find power in places men never think to look, in healing herbs, in whispered conversations, in the careful preservation of memory. They create their own justice when the law fails them. Revolution happens in kitchens as much as in streets. Allende's relationship with her uncle, Salvador Allende, the democratically elected president overthrown by Pinochet, adds layers of personal pain to the political narrative. She writes not just about abstract concepts of democracy and dictatorship, but about the specific ache of watching loved ones destroyed by historical forces beyond their control. Politics becomes personal when it tears apart your family. The novel's treatment of torture and political violence refuses to sensationalize or exploit. Allende writes from the understanding that some wounds cannot be healed by time alone, that justice delayed becomes justice denied. Her characters carry the marks of history in their bodies, their scars serving as testimonies to crimes that governments deny. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Alba, the youngest generation, represents both continuity and change. She inherits her family's gifts and curses, but also their capacity for transformation. Through her eyes, readers see how the cycle of violence can be broken, how love can triumph over hatred, how hope can survive even the darkest night. Children carry the future in their fragile hands. The novel's exploration of mental illness and supernatural ability blurs the lines between madness and prophecy. Allende suggests that in a world gone mad, the supposedly crazy might be the only ones seeing clearly. She treats mental difference not as pathology but as a different way of perceiving reality's hidden truths. Sometimes madness is the sanest response to an insane world. Allende's writing process, beginning with a letter to her dying grandfather, reveals the novel's origins in grief and love. She writes to preserve memory, to honour the dead, to ensure that their stories survive. The act of writing becomes a form of prayer, a way of keeping the departed alive through the power of words. Every story is a letter to someone we've lost. The novel's treatment of machismo reveals both its power and its fragility. Allende shows how traditional masculine roles trap men as much as they oppress women, how the cult of strength creates weakness, how the fear of vulnerability leads to violence. Her male characters struggle against their own conditioning, some transcending it, others destroyed by it. Masculinity becomes a mask that eventually suffocates the wearer. The big house's destruction mirrors the collapse of old social orders throughout Latin America. Allende uses architecture as metaphor for the instability of all human constructions, political systems, social hierarchies, family structures. What seems permanent can crumble in an instant, leaving only stories to mark what once stood. Every building is temporary, only stories last forever. The novel's exploration of Indigenous wisdom challenges Western concepts of reality and rationality. Allende draws from native traditions that understand time as circular, that see death as transformation, that recognize the spiritual dimension of material existence. Her characters who embrace this wisdom find strength unavailable to those trapped in linear thinking. Ancient knowledge offers answers to modern questions. Allende's prose carries the rhythms of oral tradition, the cadences of stories passed down through generations. She writes as if speaking to a beloved child, her voice carrying the weight of authority and the tenderness of care. Her narrative style bridges the gap between written and spoken word, between literature and life. The best stories sound like conversation with someone who loves you. The novel's treatment of exile explores not just physical displacement, but spiritual homelessness. Allende writes, from the understanding that exile is not just about leaving a place, but about losing a version of yourself. Her characters carry their homeland in their hearts, their memories becoming their only true country. Sometimes you have to leave home to understand what home means. The novel's influence on subsequent Latin American women writers cannot be overstated. Allende opens doors that had been locked for generations, proving that women's voices can carry the weight of historical testimony. Her success paves the way for countless other writers to claim their right to tell their own stories. Every breakthrough makes the next one possible. The theme of bearing witness runs through every page like a river carrying sediment from distant mountains. Allende's characters understand that survival is not enough. They must also remember, must also testify, must also ensure that the stories of the disappeared are not lost to official silence. Witnessing becomes a form of resistance, memory a weapon against forgetting. The novel's circular structure suggests that endings are also beginnings, that every conclusion contains the seeds of new stories. Allende understands that healing happens not through forgetting, but through integration, not through silence, but through speaking truth to power in all its forms. Every ending is pregnant with possibility. The book's continued relevance in an age of global political upheaval proves that some stories transcend their historical moment to become timeless warnings and promises. Allende's vision of families torn apart by ideology speaks to contemporary readers living through their own dark chapters. Great literature doesn't just reflect its time, it illuminates all times. The novel's treatment of hope as a choice rather than a feeling challenges readers to consider their own capacity for transformation. Allende shows that hope is not naive optimism, but a discipline, a practice, a decision to believe in the possibility of change even when evidence suggests otherwise. Hope is not what we feel, it's what we choose to do. In the end, the House of the Spirit stands as a monument to the power of story, to preserve what tyrants would destroy, to heal what violence has wounded, to transform what seems immutable. Allende's masterpiece reminds us that every family is a nation, every nation a family, every story a bridge between the world as it is and the world as it could be. We are all connected by invisible threads of story, each life a chapter in humanity's ongoing book.